talked about a few other things I do, but I'm going to do a short version. I became a SSAS trustee 2018, and I heard about SSAS through my property networking. And up until about 4 years ago, I didn't know what a SSAS was. So a lot of people out there don't know what a SSAS is. Trustee structure, and you can make your own decisions about investing. So that's the power of SSAS. You're actually in control. You are actually the bank. So the published figure is there's 22,000 SSASs in the whole country, which is quite alarming given there's 2.5 trillion of pension money out there. And there's, as I said, there are lots of lost pots of pension sitting around doing nothing. So just some interesting figures that have come out of a survey done recently. The average size of a SSAS is approximately £300,000, and you can have up to 11 members in a SSAS. I myself have a solo one. The most common size is the 1 and 2 member size. There are people who have up to 11, and that can be made up of your family members as long as they're 18 years old, and your team as well that you work with. So no big surprise there. There's an overriding predominantly male members of about 80% are male and 20% female. So that's not a big surprise. And predominantly they're based in the southeast, the northwest. There's a big sizable presence also in Yorkshire and Scotland of SSAS trustees. So you're asking you'd be thinking, what does a SSAS actually do?
Okay, so what can a SSAS do? You can obviously invest in commercial property. That's what's one of the main things the SSAS is known for. So apart from the obvious, you can also invest in retail units, nursing homes. You can even buy a prison if you wanted to buy a prison. You can do loans to unconnected third parties, which is what I use my SSAS for. So I like to call those third party loans for short. And a very, very, very popular strategy is doing the loan bank to yourself, where you can use your 50% of your SSAS pot. You can invest in crowdfunding via a platform. You can even buy gold, bullion. You can invest in the stock market, and you can do a range of all the financial instrument products. You can buy copyrights and trademarks, and there's a lot more. One thing you can do is obviously invest in business. And an example I mentioned before, I don't know if anyone caught it, you could buy a Rolex business, but you can't buy the Rolex. So you can't just go out there and buy yourself a Ferrari. You will end up being in deep trouble. So I'll briefly touch on, you can invest in residential property, but development only. And that's a whole nother conversation. So I won't drill down on that one right now. So a SSAS is very beneficial to anyone that runs a business. And I think all business owners should know about SSAS. As I said, there's only 22,000 SSASs at the last published count by the pension regulator. So an awful lot of business owners don't know about SSAS. They're hugely tax efficient, no capital gains tax, no income tax. You can do a lot of things tax efficiently, but you need to know what you're doing. Otherwise, if you get it wrong, well, it's pretty much game over. So you do need to engage the experts if you're wanting to do a technical structure. People can set up their commercial leases where they actually receive rental income tax-free, but you wouldn't want to do that yourself. If you get it wrong, as I said, a mess. And one of the most powerful things a SSAS does is it lives forever. You can leave a legacy to another generation. So it's a multi-generational tool. Is everyone hearing me okay?
Yes, great.
Good, yes. Good. Okay, so just to go back to the subject I've touched on, a SSAS is really not for everyone. It is a business, and it should be run as a business. You effectively, when your SSAS comes to life, when it's been registered with HMRC, a SSAS starts its life as cash. So effectively you become a bank, and you need to act like a bank. And that means bank grade due diligence kicks in here. So you really have to know what you can do, what you can't do. You've got to know what's compliant. You don't want to let that someone else control the decisions of what you're going to do, because a lot of people get a bit scared sometimes when the SSAS comes to life. They're like, oh my gosh, it's all happened and I don't know where to start, and they do leave their money in their trust account and it can just erode away. So yeah, a really big thing is obviously picking the right administrator. We talked a lot about that last week, and that conversation can just roll and roll for days, because administrators' services and what they do for you varies so much from one to the other. But we're trying to work on a sort of preferred list of administrators. That's what we're going to try and achieve by our working group, our little WhatsApp channel. So as I said, the tax benefits are huge, but the tax penalties are massive if you get it wrong. And one thing that can trump any type of security in a deal is HMRC. So yeah, I've heard of more than 55% tax charges, and the money just disappears. They just come and take it. So whatever you do with your SSAS, you've got to be very clear from the outset what your exit is. And as I said, engage those experts. A lot of people mention the word SIP and sort of say, you know, why can't I just start with a SIP? Why can't I just have a SIP? Why do I need to go down the SSAS road? So I'll briefly touch on this. A SIP is actually a great starting place for people with a small pot of money. Anyone can join a SIP and then one day move into a SSAS. But there's one thing about a SIP. They can't do anything better than a SSAS. So that's just sort of talking about what a SIP is, nowhere near as powerful as a SSAS. So yeah, so as I said, I've been doing third-party loans. I've invested my SSAS with crowdfunding, and I've invested in business. And some of you heard my recent podcast with Mark Stokes from the SSAS Alliance talking about what I've done and sort of like my journey into SSAS. And that's pretty much a very quick overview.
Can I ask a question? For asking questions, can
Sure.
you put any kind of pension into a SSAS?
Yes, that's what I did. My pension started life as a normal pension because I worked as a consultant project manager in the city, and yeah, I used to contribute to my pension every month, and obviously that was tax advantageous. And I converted that into a SSAS. Yes.
Yeah. So okay, cool.
Michelle, can you talk about how you can leverage your pension pot via a loan, please?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Can you talk about how you can leverage your pension via a loan, please?
Okay, are you talking about a loan to yourself, or you're talking about a loan to a third party? Because you can do both.
Just the fact that if you have a pension pot of £50,000, for example, you've got the ability to leverage, to take out a loan against that of X%, but I'm not sure what the percentage is or how it works.
So if you're doing, well, we'll talk about the 50 grand first, and Suzanne, I'm sure you're listening to this. We were talking about the sort of like amount that's efficient to have as a SSAS. Suzanne, can you hear me?
Yeah. So yeah, I think this things here. You're talking about the 50% borrowing, aren't you? So where you can
loan back 50%.
Yeah. So we've done where I've bought a property and it's 50% owned by the well, it's all owned by the SSAS, but I've borrowed 50% off the lender as well, so that you can leverage up. So a bit like the traditional buy-to-let route. So an example would be the property that we bought last year for 330,000, and I got a 50% loan from a bank. There's only certain banks. That's a bit of a minefield as well. So certain administrators registered with certain banks. So we had to go to a different bank from our usual to do this. However, that wasn't too much of a problem. So they lent us 50% of the purchase price. Then the idea to leverage up after that is, and I'm just doing this process at the moment, is that you, like you would do in a portfolio, refinance it at the end, and then borrow 50% of the new value. However, there is this really annoying clause which I'd probably have to I'll put in the WhatsApp group like a breakdown. You can only borrow 50% of the value of your SAS at that time. So the value of your SAS does not take into account the property that you're buying at 330,000. It takes into account however much you've put in from other pensions that you've brought together. So I thought it would be as simple as I'll get 50% off Lloyd's and 50% out of my SAS, buy this property. But it didn't work like that. You can only ever borrow 50% of what's in your pension. So whatever you pull together from your other pension pots, put in your SAS, say that was £200,000. In my maths, I would think I could buy a property for 400,000. But the reality is that you can only borrow 100 against your 200. So your purchase price is 300. Does that make sense? I can put it in, I can do it in WhatsApp. So whatever the value that you transfer in, you can borrow 50% on top of, secured against an asset. So if you transfer in 200,000 from a BT pension or somewhere, then you can borrow £100,000 of that off a bank. So then you have a pot of 300,000 to buy a property. Sadly, you can't match. So you can't say, I've got 200 in my pension, I want to borrow 200. They don't look at it like that. However, it's still money that you can use for yourself. So I'm now refinancing that property and it's worth 550,000, but I can't borrow 50% of that 550,000 because that's not in your pension pot until after you've done the drawdown. So it's a fantastic tool, but you can't leverage quite as quickly as we would do it outside, but you can still leverage. Does that answer the question?
With your remortgage right now, Suzanne, the money that you borrowed just goes back to pension pot? No strings attached?
Yeah, so sadly you can't get your hands on it, but I had more money in the pension pot, so I've developed that property with funds directly from the pension and directly from my company. So I'm getting £100,000 extra back off the bank in a refinance. So it's like a further advance. That's going to come into the pension pot, and then, because they won't give you it directly, I apply to the pension administrator with my receipts and draw down that 100,000 back to me back to the company. So the company is linked to the SAS. So any repairs and everything that you do on that property, you do through your company, because it's too expensive for the SAS to be agreeing every little receipt and repair. So you've got to facilitate it and isolate it separately in your company, and then I will do I've got a big invoice ready to go that breaks down, well, it's not the 100 because I've used some of it, but what I want out, and then they will send me a chap's payment for it after they've agreed it, because it has to go to trustees to sign off, and they have property lawyers, because there are things that you're not allowed to buy in a pension. So it's literally the fabrication of the building. You can't do any furnishings or anything like that. It's the fabrication, because it's supposed to be commercial property that you then rent out. So we are using this building part as our office. So there's only certain things that you can go through, but you can make that work. I mean, it's just the same as doing your accounts for a buy to let. Some things are capital costs, some things are revenue costs.
Suzanne, in that example, how do you said that you borrowed part of it from your SAS and then your company purchased the remainder of the asset. Is that correct? So
no, it's all purchased in the SAS. So the loan from the bank went into the SAS, and then the SAS purchased the property. Then I've developed the property, which I had extra money in the SAS. So say I spent 50,000, I drew those receipts down from the SAS, and then I've put in my own money from the linked company, but I haven't put it into the SAS. I've just done the expenses from my business account, and then I will claim those business receipts back from the pension.
Right. Okay. So my question then is, can you buy a share in a property with your SAS? Say, for example, you've got a small SAS and it won't cover, even with the loan, it won't cover the property price. Can you organise for, say, your property company to buy a certain percentage of the property, or does the SAS need to own the whole property?
It doesn't need to own the whole property. I've done that as well, but I would say you've got to consider the proportion, because the fees are probably quite high. So if your SAS is then attached to part ownership of a building, then it has to do its own returns on that. You have to do lots of returns to HMRC and things like that. So I think one of the other questions that came up first is, how much should you, what's the minimum amount in a SAS? And I think it depends on what you want to do with it, but it needs to be a reasonable chunk to make it worthwhile, because your solicitor's fees in that scenario, then they have you go almost, if you think of it as like you've got two sets of solicitor's fees, you've got your conveyancing solicitor's fees, and then your SAS fees are going to be around the same amount, because they have to check every document. They're really I've had to get the bank, like Lloyd's Bank that do billions, to change some little wordings on their form because the SAS doesn't like it. So it's a time and effort thing, really. You've got to quantify how big what percentage of that building, and is that the right way to do it? I think if you've got a smaller pot, and I know me and Michelle were talking about it earlier, it's deciding what you want to do with it. You might be better in a SIP, invest in it, or
build it up, and then do a SAS later.
Suzanne, sorry, I have a question. I was under the assumption that SAS needs to have a first charge over the property. So in terms of how did you join it up with a loan from the bank? So bank didn't require the first charge?
The SAS owns the property. So the SAS owns the property, and the bank has a charge after the SAS, which is why it's at a smaller percentage.
You're talking about the commercial, you're talking actually about commercial property. It is not a residential property you're talking about.
You can't buy residential property in a SAS. It has to be commercial.
Well, we did. That's what we did. We lended money to the company. So 50%, what you're saying.
That's a different scenario.
Yeah. I was wondering if you're talking about commercial or residential. Yeah.
No, that's a loan back. That's not buying property in your pension. That's just loaning the money to your company, and then
that's what we did.
They would have first charge. Yes, that's the two different.
I was wondering because our scenario was also that we didn't really have enough money to cover the entire purchase price. So we had to top it up with our own money. We couldn't really find another bank who'd be able, be happy with second charge on a property.
Yeah. So, I mean, that would be an option, Gillian, that you could do, is you could loan money from the SAS directly into the company that's buying the property and do it that way as an option. But that's the...
Can I just ask, what are the limitations on purchasing if you do it that way? Is there any limitations? Because obviously, normally it's commercial only. what are the limitations if I do it via a company?
You can, well, you're lending the company, it's just a loan, but it's a short-term loan. Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding and what I've done is it's like a 5-year loan. So and it's just a loan agreement that you draw up, and you.
I've not done a loan back, but I believe it can't be more than 5 years, and you've got to repay it every year. Yeah.
Yeah, you've got to repay every year, and you've got to set up the payments, and it has to be capital and interest. So it's like a quarterly payment. So you could use it, like if you were doing a development like you're, obviously going into, you could use that money if you're going to get out of that finance in a short-term period. So you could I did it on a development. Well, I had a building that was part commercial and part residential. So I bought the commercial ground floor in the SAS, and I bought the residential in the company, and then I had extra money in the SAS, which I lent the company on a short-term, on a 5-year loan to purchase the residential part. But I had to split the titles to do that, which my solicitor's quite good. She doesn't charge me a fortune for that, but that got round the mixed, because you can't buy a mixed development, but you could split it on purchase. You could split the title and do some commercial and some residential. There's always ways to get it to work. You've just got to remember what you're doing and what the long-term goal is. If you're going to keep the commercial element commercial and keep it in your SAS, then that's the right place for it to be. If you're going to change it to residential, then that's a bigger conversation that you have to look at. It's too specific to a building and a scenario.
But I think the point is you've got to be very clear before you go down the road of what you're doing. You can't sort of change your mind halfway through. You've got to be very clear from the outset.
When you talk about loaning a company, is it on an agreed, how do you agree a percentage charge for it?
You decide. What they say is it has to be reasonable. So there's two views of this. Is if you were an investor, so if I was lending money to you, then I could set the loan at 6, 8, 10%, whatever I wanted as my return. If you're loaning it back to yourself, then you can put a low interest rate on that, but it can't be too low. So I think I did mine at about 2%, 2.5%. The pension needs to make some money. So you can't put 0 rate, and likewise, like 20% would be frowned on. So you're just trying to balance in the middle, but you've got both scenarios there. So if you're using yours to invest in other people, then you can charge whatever rate you would want to charge, whether it's 6, 8, 10%. If you're loaning to yourself, then you've got to charge yourself something, but ultimately it's your choice. Some of the questions on the right hand side. So we've got Catherine. Can you loan against SA purchase if you buy as a company? Where's Catherine? Do you mean a service department?
Yes. So if you set up a company and you decide you want to buy like an SA property, can you do that or loan to it?
A loan is 5 years maximum.
Yeah.
Yep.
You've got to repay the capital within that 5 years. So it's probably not going to be the best way to purchase a residential property, because you're going to have to pay it the entire amount plus interest back. in 5 years. It's more of a facility to do things, I think, that you can then, if you were developing it and then you could refinance it off, then yes, you could do that.
Yeah, sorry, that's what I mean. Yeah, if you find something and develop it, as if it's a residential, you can do that then.
Yes, in your company, but you can only borrow 50%. If it's to your company, you can only borrow 50% of your pot. So if I had 100,000 in there, I can't use that 100,000 in my company. I can only use 50,000, and it has to be secured against an asset. So it's a numbers thing. Have you got enough in your pot to buy something unencumbered? I believe if you're going to lend out, that you don't have that same restriction, Michelle, do you, of 50%? You could lend whatever you want out of your pot to someone else, but not to your connected company.
You can utilise all of it, but obviously you may have fees coming out depending on how you pay your administrative fees, whether it's from a limited company or out of the SAS pot. But then it also depends on your strategy as well. I mean, some people like to fully deploy their SAS, but some people like to be investor ready, and in case an opportunity they've been waiting for is coming along. So it comes down to your personal strategy plan.
Let's have a look. Rules around, Louise, rules around interest payments linked to Bank of England. I think you can decide on what rates you want to charge yourself. So you could say 2% over base, or you could just say.
Yeah, that's what I meant, that it's linked to the base rate of the Bank of England. I thought there was a minimum amount. So there's the Bank of England base rate plus. Sorry?
1 over base is a number I've heard of. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
If that's
So there is I thought there was a minimum linked to the Bank of England base rate. You can't just decide it's like 1/4%.
No, exactly. That's right. You can't just say there's no interest. There has to be a reasonable amount. And yeah, I said 2%. It was probably 2% when I was looking at it.
Yeah, we were going through this recently, and it's 1% over the 6.
Yeah, 1 over base.
6 retail banks. So yeah, it's not much at the moment.
Okay, Natalie, you said you've got a couple of questions.
Hi. So we're working with an investor, a private investor, and he wants to invest his SAS part into one of our projects. Most of ours are converting to residential. So am I right in saying they wouldn't be able to be structured as a joint venture? It could only be a loan back from his SAS, because he wouldn't be able to, because it would be residential.
He would, how has he said that to you? He wants to, I suppose you've got a few options there. If he wants to loan you the money and you have a joint venture agreement, that's outside of the SAS. If he's lending it to your company, but if he's part ownership of it, then
it couldn't be a residential project.
I don't think you can't do a joint with his SAS. Michelle, do you think that's right? You can do, your company can do stuff with your SAS, but as a SAS won't, can't buy a property in multiple people. It can only be bought by the SAS.
Yeah, no, I mean, if we had a separate limited company that was owned 50% by me, 50% by him, would his SAS be able to loan into that company if that company was doing residential development?
See, this is territory I'm not 100% sure of, so I wouldn't like to say.
Michelle, hi, hello, it's Manch here. Good morning, everyone.
Hi, Man.
Hello. Just in response to that question, unfortunately, you won't be able to do that, because then one of the really important rule as far as SAS loan back is concerned is that you cannot lend money to connected parties. And if you are then buying a property jointly in another company, and then that individual is loaning back to you, you are connected. So the answer would be no in that instance.
would it be bought unencumbered with all of his funds, or would it be joint investment?
No, it would be unencumbered, so we wouldn't have like a separate bank loan on the building.
So he could lend it to your company,
yeah,
and take some security.
So that's the only way of doing it. It would just be the private loan agreement.
Yeah, because he couldn't be named on it, but he can have.
Okay, and in terms of the security on that private loan agreement, it would only be first charge. That's like the minimum. You couldn't give second charge or anything like that.
Well, there's only a second charge if there's a first charge. So
yeah, but I just mean in the scenario that, let's say, we did need to use bank finance, if we ended up buying a building that was more, I'm guessing he couldn't do the loan back because we couldn't offer first charge.
Not necessarily. I think you probably have to take that outside of the group if you want, because it's too scenario specific. But we can look at that afterwards. I think it's probably too specific to do in the group, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
I think just to be very careful about the connectivity rule, don't you?
Just on that, my understanding was that for when you're loaning money to another third party, you don't necessarily need the first charge. You only need the first charge when you are loaning 50% of your SAS fund to your sponsoring company. For example, in my case, I have loaned money to other developers through crowdfunding platforms. One is, and I don't have a first charge. So that's only a requirement if you're loaning back to your own sponsoring company.
Manj, it's a took share. I've got the same view of that. So it doesn't have to be a first charge by any means.
Okay. No, it's going to be what he's comfortable with. Yeah, so that's part of the discussion.
Can I just say, so we've done used SAS Investor Pensions, and we didn't have a first charge. We did a second charge. I suppose it depends on the amount of money. So if it's not a huge amount, and they feel comfortable with looking at your track record, your history, will you be able to pay it back? Then if they're comfortable with that, then the first charge isn't necessary. So we did a second charge.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thanks, guys.
Okay, going back to the questions, Carolina, you put 50% max to your property only if you can take a loan. Can you take out more?
So is it so you guys also mentioned the loans to companies for purchase of other companies. Does the 50% maximum of your pot also applies for loans, or is it just property?
So the 50% of your pot is loaned back to your company, so the connected company. So
okay,
SAS is attached to a particular business and a set of accounts. If you want to do a loan to a different company that's not the associated company, then it's the 50% doesn't come into play, but it's just you can only loan yourself 50% of the pot.
So in principle, you could do 100. In principle, you could allocate 100% of your pot, 50% to yourself and your
and you can loan out the other 50%, yes, to somebody else. Yeah.
Good.
And that's what a lot of people do. They use that 50% loan back, and then they think, oh, I've got some money left. What can I do? And you can break that down into third-party loans to developers, or you can do crowdfunding with it. So I personally haven't done a loan back. That's why I haven't answered too many of these questions, because I know Manj and Suzanne are more expert around the loan back.
Kim's got a question.
Hi, morning everyone. I just have a quick question around the SIP. So Michelle, you mentioned if you only have a small pot to use a SIP first, what would you class as a small pot? And at what point do you then switch to a SAS? I suppose I'm asking, how much do you need to make a SAS worthwhile?
Okay, I think it's this is what Suzanne and I were talking about earlier before our 11 o'clock started. We were sort of looking at the number of about 50,000. I think it really depends on what you're going to be doing with it and how much your fees are. Because say you had £55,000, I mean, depending on how much you're charged to set that SSAS up and what your annual fee is, you know, that could get eaten away quite quickly, depending on what you've invested in to start building the pot up. So I've never had a SIP, but I believe a lot of people go from SIP to SSAS once they've got quite a sizable amount. But you've got to be very careful what an IFA tells you, because a lot of them will steer you away from SSASs. They don't like them. So do you agree with that, Suzanne?
Yeah, I think a SIP can be administered by an IFA easier.
Yep.
So it's more accessible to the market. We did this. We put funds in a SIP. Then we went to buy a commercial property, and the bank would not do you can't do the loan back in the same way. So we had to convert it to a SSAS. I think the amount in the pot is probably the biggest question, but the question that you need to ask yourselves is, what do you want to do with that money? So if you've got 50,000, are you going to be able to buy a commercial property to hold and grow? Does your company make profits each year so that you're going to top up your SSAS each year, because you can put the money in before you take it out before you pay corporation tax? Are you wanting to get hold of that money so that you can use it as investment funds to, you know, crowdfund or to give to other people to get a better return than on the stock market? All of those decisions are so individual, so there is not one right answer. I think you've got to decide on what you want to do with it. So I think our train of thought when we started was, okay, how much would we have if we pulled all our pensions together, and what do we want it to look like? So for us, we always like to buy property, so we wanted to buy more property. So we bought commercial property. Now, I've done a few things as we've been going along where I've borrowed the money, developed, moved on. It's quite tricky, and I've done loan backs. And I've got to a position where my pot was big enough to buy a good commercial property, which I want to own forever. So my pot now has got commercial properties in it. There's extra funds in there swirling about because you need them. And then I top it up. And then all of the income from that commercial building is going in each year. So, you know, in 2 years' time, I can buy another one because I'm getting 80 grand a year tax-free income. I'm putting in a chunk so I don't have to pay corporation tax. And then I'll buy another property. So it's very similar to the buy-to-let strategy or HMO strategy. It's just a bit slower. And it depends what your long-term goal as well is. I mean, I would say it's a bit of a hot topic and everyone's kind of, you know, keen and interested, but it's a lifelong commitment, this. It's not, you can't get it back out. You know, you've got to pay your administration fees every year forever. You've got to have someone to look after it, and you've got to have a strategy. You need to think of it as a separate business. So for us, we have multiple streams of income, and this is one of those lanes. It's one of those streams of income, and it's its own business plan. So it's the same as when you started out in property. You've got to kind of ring fence it and decide on your own business plan, and then from that work out what you either need to do between now and then, or what you can do with what you've got. I know there's been quite a few chats about you know, pulling your pension pots together, and if you've got a final salary pension. Well, my husband had a final salary pension, and they're quite astounding how much they give to pay out on those. We got a massive chunk, which would have paid hang on, was it for like £4,000 a year when we retired? And I think they gave us 200,000. So we could do so much with it between now and when he's going to take it.
Suzanne, sorry, can I just add something to the question which Kim asked? Because I think it's a really important one in terms of how big your SaaS pot needs to be to make it work. I think I almost kind of, I almost look at how hard your money is working at the moment and what kind of rate of return you are getting on your SaaS on your investment, whether that's a corporate pension or you invested in stocks and shares. And then the other important thing is actually what is your end goal is. So in my case, for example, once I work out the initial setup fee and the ongoing annual fee, the cost of running my SaaS to date is about just over 4%. And if I exclude the setup fee, then that's 2.5%. Now, I haven't made any money on my SaaS yet because my SaaS has only been up and running for 6 months or so. But when so I transferred my corporate pension into my SaaS, and on average, I was making about 8%. So in my head, I was very much, okay, for my SaaS to make it work, I need to be making at least 10% to make it work, to make it worth its while. Because all of those costs I mentioned, over 4% and a 2.5%, does not actually include all the time I have invested in learning about SaaS and doing my due diligence on all the investments which I have made. Because ultimately, as a trustee, any decisions you make, they are on your head. You are responsible for them. So it's not just, actually the pot of money, is actually how are you going to utilize that? What kind of return you're getting on your investment at the moment, and what is your end goal is. And the other thing to bear in mind is that there are some prerequisites before you can set up a SaaS. You need to have a sponsoring company, and the company needs to be trading. And in my case, Empowered Pension wanted a proof that I'm actually an employed director in the company. I wasn't taking any salary because I'm in full-time employment, but Empowered Pension would not put my case forward to HMRC until I've set up a payroll. So that was, for me, that was additional cost because I have to pay quite a lot of tax for 3 months because I have to set up a separate payroll just to prove that I'm an active director in my company. Whereas Landlord's Pension, who did the SaaS, set up the SaaS for one of my friends, just asked us to sign an employment contract. So again, it's kind of what's your investments earning at the moment? How are you going to use that? But also, do you meet all those requirements? In my case, I didn't meet one of the requirements because I couldn't prove that I'm an active director in the company because I wasn't taking salary. So that took 6 months and cost me additional money.
Should we go back to the questions in the side? So, because we've done it, we're at 12 o'clock. What age can you take your income? 55. Do I need to consolidate my pension pots first? No, your SaaS administrator would do that for you. They would pull it together.
They consolidate and they do the HMRC registration.
Yeah. And I think that, I've got a different experience of the director thing that you were just saying. So I think each company is different on their methods. And I probably didn't have to do that because our company's been going for so long and trading. Yes, it's important to take financial advice. So I know there was a few things, well, it was in the SaaS Facebook group actually, that you need to get financial advice if you're taking a final salary pension. If you're going to remove a final salary pension into a SaaS, you are supposed to have independent advice, or you've got to prove that you're an astute investor. So it's a bit of it depends on who you're talking to. I mean, we invest, that's our full-time career and has been for 20 years. So there's different criteria that different people do, but yeah, you should take any advice. However, and you know, make sure you get the right IFA, because if they're not in this industry, they're not going to know about it. They don't know everything about everything, so it's finding the right person. Yeah, so Louise, Kevin said that you need to make more than 6% as a minimum, otherwise it's not worth it. Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, it's the same as looking at a pension statement that you get every year. They put their fees on, and you know, you might end up with 2 or 3%. So you are either doing it because you need to use the money to help another business, or you're doing it to make a bigger fund, so it has to work, which is why it's its own business, it's its own business plan, and it should have its own objectives. I think that's all the questions on there, but obviously if you've got any more, then put them in the WhatsApp group. Shall we? Michelle, do you want to finish off?
Are you able? Sorry, I can't see the questions. Apologies, I'm going to be calling my internet provider. Can you save the chat?
Just to say, if anyone's not in the WhatsApp group and they want to join the SAS WhatsApp group, just let Michelle know, or anyone know in the group. We can get you into that.
Apologies if I haven't put everyone on there, but let me know.
And we're coming up to 12 o'clock now, and so I wanted to say a big thanks to Manj, Suzanne, Sedja and Michelle for all their time to set up this brunch today. So a big thank you from all of us.